One of my favorite things to do when I'm discussing the history of RPGs is to bring up a design feature which was popular in a recent RPG, and then point out how it actually first appeared in Dungeons & Dragons. Most people are not too surprised to find out that an RPG mechanic existed first in the tabletop giant. After all, D&D, and tabletop RPGs in general, are experiencing a renaissance, and many digital RPG players have some experience playing one of them. What tends to surprise these players is how D&D mechanics from the late 70s and early 80s were often equal to, or even more advanced than, the modern digital versions of those same ideas. D&D features robust versions of things like procedural generation, phased enemy behavior, item inventory management, and plenty of other ideas. But the one feature that I really love to pull out from the D&D archive is town and castle building. In this video, we're going to look at a couple of classic console RPGs with castle and town building mechanics. Those games are Breath of Fire 2 and Suikoden 2. We'll see what they can tell us about how those games interpreted one of the more obscure parts of their tabletop roots. In the early editions of D&D, characters who reached levels 15 through 18 were considered to be endgame characters, and they were supposed to settle down and start a castle, or a dojo, or a wizard's tower, or something like that. An entire community would then spring up around them, and this new town would provide many of the practical services that shape an RPG campaign for new characters. The original description of this town was vague, perhaps purposefully so, and dungeon masters would fill such communities with whatever their players needed. But we're interested in how digital RPG designers interpreted these ideas. One of the earliest examples of castle building in a mainstream RPG came in Konami's 1994 title, Breath of Fire 2. The player gains control of a small, remote plot of land. As the game progresses, various displaced NPCs wind up there, offering various village services. The majority of these services are either cosmetic or mercantile. Generally, the shops in the township are slightly better than their contemporaries in towns in the same point in the plot, but they don't offer game-breaking goods until the end of the game. There are optional shop slots that do sell rare items, but these require additional materials or vast sums of money to balance the power that they offer. The most unique feature of the township is the slot for the game's idiosyncratic shaman system, in which players can be powered up along elemental lines. The shaman laboratory allows players to experiment with the system right from their home base. Breath of Fire 2's town building system was not technically the first in a digital RPG. Smaller versions of this same idea appeared in other games, and even in other JRPGs, but as we're about to see, it was extremely influential in its own genre. The Suikoden series picked up a lot of the town and castle building elements from Breath of Fire 2 and expanded their scope. In each numbered Suikoden game, the player acquires an abandoned castle, which can be filled with recruitable characters. Shops in the castle offer the same goods as contemporary towns, but some rare resources can be obtained through minigames which become available when certain characters are recruited. The minigame aspect became particularly prominent in Suikoden 2, which is largely a reflection of its era. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, JRPGs were filled with minigames, many of them tedious and irrelevant to the plot. Suikoden's designers had the good sense to make the rewards from these games matter. Many games of the era required tedious grinding in chance-based games for marginal rewards. Suikoden isn't entirely free of that, but the rewards come on a much more regular schedule, and no single reward requires an enormous time commitment. That said, the most interesting thing about Suikoden's castles is that their development is tied into the game's most important feature, its 108 recruitable characters. Unlike the township in Breath of Fire, the castle in Suikoden 2 doesn't expand. Rather, it is filled with the many optional characters the game has. Acquiring more of those characters significantly expands the selection of services offered in the castle and can make life much more convenient for the player. Most idiosyncratically, expanding the number of residents in the castle allows the player to get new information about each character's background and current feelings. Since Suikoden games are actually on the shorter side for JRPGs of their day, the designers were clever to seize one of the few places where they could deepen the characterization of their huge cast. We can actually learn a lot from looking at how Breath of Fire and Suikoden adapt the tabletop design idea of castle and town building to the console RPG. Japanese-style RPGs intentionally drop many features which are essential to the experience of Western RPGs. They do this to create a more focused narrative experience. The plot of a JRPG is mostly predetermined, and its characters want what they want, not what the player wants. Town and castle building reclaims some of the choice and non-linear exploration that is lost in the JRPG style. When building a castle, players have to make choices about which service or optional reward they want to pursue. Moreover, to access those rewards, the player has to thoroughly explore the world, including returning to places that are no longer relevant to the plot. Essentially, castle building pulls all of the choice and exploration out of the plot and gives it to the player in a place where it doesn't affect the overall narrative flow. Base building is one of the rare features that originated on the tabletop, saw lots of development in JRPGs, and then was enthusiastically embraced in the West. But now, the feature has come full circle and is a widespread and widely enjoyed feature of contemporary RPGs.